Please help me. I'm stuck in my room, months after surviving the most traumatic experience of my life, and according to my doctor, I'm developing agoraphobia. But I don't think he or my family understand that I'm in literal fucking danger. I haven't slept in, 3 days? I can't eat, and I've locked myself in here for my own safety, as well as my father's and brother's. I have no clue what to tell them. Fuck, I don't even know where to start. I try to explain, but the words get tangled in my throat, like I'm choking on a tongue twister. And I won't tell you why my hands are slick with blood, sticky, wet, and fucking vile. I can still feel it, like there's something lodged deep inside me. So deep, not even my dad's penknife can reach it. I've spent most of the week hunched over the bathroom sink, watching dried blood swirl down the drain like tea leaves. I've carved into my ear so many times, the sting of the blade doesn't even register anymore. But you have to understand, if I don't get this thing out of me, they'll find me again. And this time, I'm not sure I'll survive. First, let me make this clear. This isn't some attention-seeking bullshit. I know what I went through seriously fucked with my head, but like I keep telling everyone, I know they're not done with us. My doctor thinks I'm crazy, and my dad is considering sending me to a psych ward. Mom is different. She's been on the other side of my bedroom door all day, guarding me, protecting me from them. Dad says it's PTSD, and maybe that's part of it. But I'm also being hunted. Maybe a psych ward is what's best for me, but they'll find me, just like they've undoubtedly found the other 4. I've never felt so helpless, so hopeless, so alone. Dad is convinced just because Grammy had schizophrenia, I must have it too. Mom told him to leave, like I said, for his own safety. This is me screaming into the void because I have nobody else to talk to. I'm 17 years old, and back in July, my mom forced me to join a social experiment, which was basically non-televised. Big Brother, but for Gen Z. I wasn't interested. Last year's summer camp had already been a disaster. A kid caught some virus. He didn't die, but he got really sick, and they said it had something to do with the lake. Luckily, I didn't swim in it. Camp was canceled, and for months afterward, I had to go in for bi-weekly checks to make sure I wasn't infected. I thought this summer would be less of a mess. But then Mom gave me an ultimatum. Either I join a summer camp or extracurricular like my brother, or she'd send me to live with Dad. For reasons I won't explain, yes, I'd rather risk contracting a disease than spend the summer with Dad. His idea of a vacation is dragging my brother and me to his office. Now that Travis and I are old enough to make our own decisions, we avoid him like the plague. The divorce just made it easier. Mom never stops. She either works, runs errands, or creates new jobs so she can stay busy. When we were younger, she was diagnosed with depression. A lot of my childhood was spent sitting on her bed, begging her to get up, or being stuck in Dad's office, playing games on his laptop. Now Mom makes up for all that lost time by being insufferable. She thought she was helping, but in reality, I was being smothered. When I wasn't interested in participating in her summer plans, my mother already had a rebuttal. Looming over me, blonde wisps of hair falling in overshadowed eyes and wrapped up like a marshmallow, Mom resembled my personal angel of death. "Just read it," she sighed, refilling my juice. The flyer looked semi-professional. If you ignored the Comic Sans, it was black and white, with a simple triangle in the center. I'll admit, I was kind of intrigued. 10 teenagers, 5 boys, and 5 girls, all living together in a mansion on the edge of town. It sounded like a recipe for disaster. 2 days later, we got the call. I was in. The terms raised eyebrows. I wasn't allowed to use my real name. Instead, I had to pick from a list of traditionally feminine names, whatever that meant. Marie, Amelia, Rosa. Mom doesn't understand the meaning of no, so I found myself stuck in the passenger seat of her fancy car as she drove me to the preliminary testing center. The tests were supposed to assess our mental and physical health to make sure we were fit for the experiment. The building loomed ahead, cold, sterile structure of mirrored glass. No welcome signs, no color, just a desolate parking lot and checkerboard windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Yeps. Exactly how I wanted to spend my summer. Being probed inside a dystopian hellhole. Seeing the testing center was the moment my feeble reluctance, but going along with it anyway, because why not, turned into full-blown panic once I caught sight of those soulless, symmetrical windows staring down at me. With my gut twisting and turning, I begged Mom to let me go to the disease-ridden summer camp instead. Or, better yet, let me stay inside. There was nothing wrong with rotting in bed all day. "I'm not going," I said, refusing to shift from my seat. Mom sighed impatiently, glancing at her phone. My consultation was at 1:30, and it was 1:29. "Tessa," Mom said with a sigh, "I'm not supposed to tell you this. It's against the rules. But," she rolled her eyes, "call it quid pro quo if you want." I knew what was coming. The same threat every summer. "If you don't do what I say, you can go live with your father." I avoided making eye contact with her. "I'm not living with Dad." Mom cleared her throat. "This isn't just a social experiment, Tessa. It's a test of endurance. The team that stays in the house the longest wins a prize." She paused, playing with her fingers in her lap. $1 million. I nearly fell out of my seat. $1 million, I choked out. "Are you serious?" "Parents aren't supposed to tell the participants." Mom shushed me like they could hear us. "It's to avoid coercion. The experiment is supposed to be natural participation and a genuine intention to take part." Mom's lip twitched. "But I know you wouldn't participate unless there was money involved." Mom sighed. "Is this the wrong time to say you remind me of your father?" She was sneaking panicked looks at me, but I was already thinking about how $1 million would get me through college without a dime from Dad, who was using my college fund to drag me on vacations. I snapped out of it when Mom not so gently nudged me with a chuckle. "Between the 5 of you," she reminded me. "But still, it's a lot of money, Amelia." Amelia. So she was already calling me by my subject name. Totally normal. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a clinically white room with several other kids. No windows, just a single sliding glass door. There were 3 rows of plastic chairs, with 4 occupied. 2 girls on my left, 2 boys on my right, all bathed in painfully bright lights. I could only see their torsos. A guard collected my phone, a towering woman resembling Ms. Trunchbull, right down to the too tight knotted hair and military uniform. I barely made it 3 strides before she was stuffing a white box under my nose, 4 iPhones already inside. I dropped my phone in, only for her to pull it back and thrust it back in my face. "Turn it off," she spat. I obeyed, my hands growing clammy. I was referred to as Amelia and told to sit in my assigned seat. I could barely see the other participants, that painful light bleeding around their faces, obstructing their identities. It took me a while to realize it was intentional. These people really did not want us to see or speak to each other. I did manage, through a lot of painful squinting, to make out one boy had shaggy sandy hair, while the other, a redhead, wore Ray-Bans. The girls were a ponytail brunette and a wispy blonde. Time passed, and the guards blocking the doorway made me uneasy. The blonde girl kept shifting in her seat, asking to use the bathroom. I just saw her as a confusing golden blur. When they told her no, she kept standing up and making her way over to the door before being escorted back. The red-headed boy was counting ceiling tiles. Through that intense light bathing him, I could see his head was tipped back, could hear him muttering numbers to himself and immediately losing his place. When he reached 4,987, he groaned, slumping in his seat. When my gaze lingered on the blonde for too long, the guard snapped at me. "Amelia, that's your first warning." The kids around me chuckled, which pissed her off even more. "If you break the rules again, you'll be asked to leave." Her voice dropped into a growl when the boys' chuckles turned into full-blown giggles. I tried to hold in my own laughter, but something about being trapped with no phones or parents and forced into a room with literally nothing to entertain us turned us all into kindergarteners again, which was refreshing. I think at some point I turned to smile at the blonde, only to be fucking blinded by that almost angelic light. I noticed the guard's knuckles whitened around her iPad. Her patience was thinning with every spluttered giggle. And honestly, that only made it harder not to laugh. "Heads down," she ordered. The spluttered laughing was starting to get to her. I don't know what it was about her authoritative tone, but we obeyed almost instantly, ducking our heads like falling dominoes. In 3 strides, she loomed over us, the stink of hair gel and shoe polish creeping into my nose and throat. I didn't dare look up, but when one of the boys coughed, I knew I wasn't the only one overwhelmed by the smell. This woman's simple knotted ponytail was not worth that much hair gel. She paced up and down our little line, and I watched her boots thud, thud, thud across the floor. When she stopped in front of me, the smell grew toxic, my eyes smarting, and my eyes started to water. "If you make any more noise, you will be asked to leave." With $1 million hanging over my head, I didn't. Luckily, after hanging my head for what felt like 2 hours, my name was finally called. The afternoon was a literal blur. I was welcomed into a small room and told to perch on a bed with a plastic coating, the kind they have in emergency rooms. I went through my usual checkup. They measured my height and weight and drew some blood. According to the man prodding and poking me, my physical health was perfect. During the mental health tests, I answered a series of questions about my well-being, confidence, social life, relationships, and overall attitude toward life. I studied the guy's expression as he ran through the questions, and I swear he didn't even blink. He looked about my dad's age, maybe a little younger, with a receding hairline. He wore casual jeans and a shirt under a white coat. "All right, Amelia. Your preliminary tests are looking promising so far," he said, standing and offering me a kind, if slightly suspicious, smile. It looked almost mocking. "You're probably not going to like this part, but I can assure you this is simply to protect subject confidentiality." He nodded reassuringly. I tried to smile back, but I was definitely grimacing. He turned his back and rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a scary-looking shot. I hated needles. My gaze was already glued to the door, calculating how to dive off the bed without looking childish. I jumped when a screech echoed from outside, reverberating down the hallway. It was one of the guys. Before I could move, the doctor was in front of me, his warm breath in my face. "Open wide, Amelia." I did, opening my mouth as wide as I could. He chuckled. "Your eyes, Amelia. Open your eyes as wide as you can, and try not to blink, all right?" Another cry echoed, louder this time. The same boy. Thundering footsteps pounded down the hallway. "No, let me go. Get the fuck off me. I don't want to. I found my voice, though it came out as a whimper. "Is he?" "We're having slight trouble with one particular subject," the doctor murmured, his gloved fingers forcing my left eye open. "He is afraid of needles." His tone was gentle, and the knot in my stomach loosened. I barely felt the shot as I focused on counting the ceiling tiles. He pricked both of my eyes, and when it was over, he told me to blink 5 times and open them again. "It's not permanent," he said, though his voice sounded strange. It wasn't just my vision. It was messing with voices too. It should wear off by the time you get home. He helped me stand. If you're still experiencing blurred vision after 6 p.m., don't hesitate to contact us. Blurred vision? At first, I didn't understand what he was talking about, until my gaze found his face, which was shrouded in an eerie white fog. I couldn't blink it away. It wasn't that I couldn't see. It was as if my ability to recognize faces had been severed, like someone had driven a pipe through my brain. After temporarily blinding me, they released me from the room. I was maybe 4 steps from the threshold when I nearly tripped over someone. No, it was more like I almost fell over them. I couldn't see faces, but I saw what looked like the shadow of a guy sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around his knees. He was wearing a hospital gown that hung off his thin frame, and his bare legs were bruised, as if he'd had too many shots. Strange. I hadn't been asked to change clothes. This kid was trembling, rocking back and forth, heavy breaths rattling his chest. I guess the tests were different for guys, probably more intense than just some mental health questions and shots in both eyes. Blinking rapidly, I tried to see through the fog, but he had no identity, just a confusing blur on the edges of my vision. He looked human, but the harder I tried to focus, the more uncanny he seemed, like a silhouette bleeding into a shadow that was almost human. And yet there was something wrong. From his sudden, sharp breath, I knew he saw the same thing. I was the ghost hovering in front of him. Not wanting to break the rules, I sidestepped him, nearly tripping over my own feet. The drugs in my eyes, or whatever the fuck they were fucking with me. Did they really have to blind us to prevent us from communicating? Surely, that had to be illegal. Tessa. The voice was drowned of emotion, of humanity, masking any real emotion. But I could still hear his agony, his desperation, and his joy. When bony fingers wrapped around my arm, nails digging into my skin, I froze, not just from the touch, but from his agonizing wail that followed. He was crying, but it didn't sound human, like a robot was mimicking the tears of a human being. "It is you," he whispered, his voice splintering in my mind. How did this stranger know my real name? Something ice-cold crept down my spine. Could he see me? I stepped back. His fingers slipped from my arm one by one. He swayed, and so did his foggy, incoherent face. His torso was easier to make out. The boy was skinny, almost unhealthily so, his clothes hanging off him. "Don't move," he whispered. "They're watching us." I was aware I was backing away, before he was suddenly in my face, his breath cold against my skin. Too cold. "You need to listen to me, because I'm only going to say this once." I noticed what was sticking from his wrist, a broken tube still stuck into his skin. He'd torn out his IV. What did this kid need an IV for? "Shh," he whispered. I didn't say anything, I replied. He laughed, which was a strange choking sound through a robotic filter. "You sound like a Dalek," he giggled, barely holding himself together. Then, without warning, he grasped my arm tighter, drawing a small screech from my throat. "They keep calling me. What's the word again?" His laughter turned hysterical, nearly toppling him over. It was drowned out by more screeches, probably from the drugs masking his real laugh. He leaned closer, forcing me against the wall, breath hissing in quick bursts. "You know," he laughed. His blurry form swayed to the left, then the right, sweat-soaked curls sticking to his forehead. "Grr," he growled, breaking into another giggle. "That's what they keep calling me." The boy who knew my real name didn't stop to talk. Instead, he flicked my nose before catapulting into a run in the opposite direction. The doors flew open, and a group of guards charged after him. After that weird encounter, I somehow found my way back to my mother, who was also a blurry face. She hugged me and asked how it went. I told her I didn't want to continue. And of course she was like, "Well, you haven't even given it a real try, Tessa. It might surprise you." I was too disoriented to tell her I was partially blind. Thankfully, the blur wore off after an hour, as soon as we left the testing center. Mom was reluctant to pull me from the program until I told her they stabbed me in the eye and temporarily blinded me. I had to beg her to not go back and murder that doctor. Mom was ready to be insufferable again, but this time I actually wanted her to act like a mama bear. But once a contract is signed, not even a parent can break it. So, it was either I participated in the experiment, or my mother would be sued. That's how I found myself standing in front of a towering mansion under a dark sky. The place was beautiful, but had a macabre Addams Family vibe. I'm not sure how to describe it because my clumsy words won't do it justice. It was a mix of modern and ancient, crumbling brick walls paired with sliding glass doors. A towering statue of Athena loomed over the fountain in front of me. I snapped a quick photo with my phone, captioning it, "Sparkles Prison Sparkles for my 100 Instagram followers," before another female guard promptly confiscated it. All of the guards were female, I noticed. No men. I was only allowed one suitcase for clothes and essentials, so I dragged along a single carry-on. The organizers were a brother-sister duo of young scientists named Elizabeth and Nathaniel. They looked and acted like twins, finishing each other's sentences and mimicking expressions, which was unsettling. Elizabeth was the outspoken one, and she refused to call me by my real name outside the experiment. She was stern-looking, with dark hair tied into a ponytail, so tight it probably gave her headaches. Nathaniel was quieter, not really a talker. His smile never quite reached his eyes. He looked disheveled, to say the least. His white shirt was wrinkled, thick brown curls hanging in half-lidded eyes. Nathaniel reminded me of a college kid, not a scientist. I greeted them with a forced grin, well aware that I was practically being coerced into this experiment to keep my mother out of legal trouble. Elizabeth kept asking, "Are you excited?" So I played along with, "Yes." I'm so excited to be stuck in a mansion with strangers for 3 months. When the others arrived, we were separated into 2 groups, boys and girls. I wasn't a fan of immediately being divided. I recognized a couple of the kids from the testing center, which were the redhead and ponytail brunette. The redhead was the first to arrive after me, and he looked completely different from the scrawny kid I remembered. Without that obstructing light, he had freckles and wide brown eyes that flickered to me once before avoiding me. He was definitely on his school's football team, broad-shouldered and boyishly handsome, but his eyes kept drifting to my chest. He didn't even greet me, instead shuffling over to the boys' line. I tried to start a conversation, mentioning the testing center, but he just snorted and turned away, fully turning his back to me. When the girls arrived, I was comforted. Abigail, the anxious blonde, who was definitely the girl from the testing center, greeted me with a hesitant hug, instantly making her my favorite person. Esme, the ponytail brunette, was quick to pull Abigail away from the boys' prying eyes. Esme was tiny but had a big personality. The moment she stepped out of her Uber, she grinned at me and introduced herself as the future president of the United States. The last 2 girls were Rhea and Jane. Rhea was the influencer type, acting as if we should all recognize her on sight. Jane was exactly what her name suggested. Plain Jane. She wore a white-collared shirt, a simple skirt, and a matching headband. I didn't fully get to know the guys that first day, but I did catch their names. Freddy was the guy who would not stop talking about his dog. The only way I can describe him is to imagine Tom Holland's Spider-Man, only with a Long Island accent. He greeted me with a grin before somehow tripping over his own feet. Then there was Adam, a quiet, laid-back guy who definitely smuggled weed in his pack. His trench coat practically screamed pretentious film student. He wouldn't shut up about wanting to show us his collection of Serbian films. Jun, a Southeast Asian kid, was the joker of the group. His magic tricks were surprisingly good, leaving us all speechless. Finally, there was Ben, who stood apart from the group, his eyes narrowed. I figured I was being paranoid, but he was definitely assessing each of us. He watched Freddy jump around like a child, and Jun not so subtly flirting with Abigail. This guy was definitely a sociopath, I thought. He was calculating each of us. When his penetrating gaze found mine, I averted my eyes. Then there was Mr. Ignorant. Kai. He wasn't as bad as I initially thought, though. When we headed inside, he apologized. "Sorry about earlier," he said, fidgeting with his hands. I don't know why I did that. After that little exchange, Kai became an unlikely friend. The rules were simple. Live in the house without adults for 3 months. The organizers explained that we would be monitored the entire time, and whichever group stayed inside the house the longest would win the $1 million prize. We were allowed 1 hour of outdoor time per day, with mental and physical health specialists on standby. Just like I thought, Ben, now knowing our personalities, took charge, gathering everyone in the foyer to assign sleeping arrangements. Girls upstairs, boys downstairs. The first month was surprisingly fun. All 10 of us got along, setting up house rules and a rota for cooking. With Freddy, an unlikely chef, we ate like royalty. There were friendships that blossomed, and not much flirting, which I expected. It felt more like a summer camp than a social experiment. The mansion was huge, with 10 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and even an indoor pool where I spent most of my time. I had my own little circle. Abigail, Kai, and me. Abigail confessed that she was an orphan, and Kai admitted he struggled with body image issues and the pressure to be perfect for his parents. Those days with the 3 of us lounging by the pool were nice. Freddy joined us sometimes, diving into the pool and immediately ruining the conversation. Our little personal heaven started to spiral when we ran out of luxury items. I vaguely remembered being told when we ran out. We ran out. It was everyone's fault. Ben kept sneaking snacks up to his room, and Freddy was stealing for him, because already, that fucking sociopath already had the poor kid wrapped around his little finger. Jun baked cakes that no one ate except him, with way too much frosting. Even Abigail and I held picnics by the pool with expensive cheese and chocolate, so we weren't innocent either. However, Freddy got the most blame, since he admittedly was a little too obsessed with making every night a celebration. Ben started yelling at him, but it was Ben who insisted on making a luxury 10-cheese pasta a week earlier. When the essentials became our only food, we tried to ration them. Jun helped Freddy portion meals, and Abigail and I started noting down every food item. I concluded that as long as stuck to our rations, we could live comfortably for the duration of the experiment. Then the boys threw a midnight party. They blew through nearly a week's worth of food in one night. I dragged a disheveled Kai out of Ben's room, which stunk of urine, and demanded to know why they'd done it. He just laughed, spit in my face, and shouted, "Who wants to mattress surf?" That was the start of the divide. Esme called a house meeting and proposed a truce with Ben, the boys' leader. We agreed to split the food equally, and Esme even drew a yellow line on the staircase, making the divide official. Boys were downstairs, and girls were upstairs. I tried to talk to Kai, standing on opposite sides of the yellow line, but he just stared at me with a dead-eyed grin. He wasn't listening to me, bursting out into childish giggles when I tried to talk to him. It was like talking to a fucking toddler. When I shoved him, he snapped, "Uptight bitch." Kai's behavior became increasingly more erratic. He emptied the inside pool. How? I have no fucking idea, so I couldn't go for a swim. Then he declared it the boys' pool, and no girls were allowed. Freddy, who had turned into this cowardly freak, became the boys' messenger. He passed me a message from Kai, asking me to meet him in the foyer at 3 a.m. I actually believed it, until Esme calmly dragged me away, telling me there were 5 boys covered in war paint and armed with eggs. By the second month, everything fell apart. The boys ran out of food and started stealing ours. They became more akin to animals, aggressive and unpredictable, destroying everything in their path. They stopped showering and washing their clothes, moving in a pack formation. Freddie, who once seemed sweet, grew violent when Abigail refused to hang out with him. He screamed in her face before throwing food at her. Food that we needed. Adam and Ben ruled the boys' side of the house like kings, sending Freddie running around like a pathetic fucking messenger pigeon. He was so obsessed with being accepted by the boys, this kid had become their lapdog. When I tried to pull him to our side, he started shrieking like an animal, and to my confusion, Joan came and dragged him away, hissing at us in warning. Esme was too kind for her own good. She offered to give them a small selection of essential food items in exchange for them stopping destroying the house. They agreed, and we gave them 6 loaves of bread, a single pack of cookies, and an 8-pack of water. They used the water to soak us in our sleep, despite having access to tap water. I wasn't expecting Kai to pay me a visit the night after their hazing ritual. He pulled me from my bed, muffling my cries, and dragged me into the downstairs bathroom. I was ready to scream bloody murder, but then I saw the slow trickling streak of red pooling down his temple. Kai held a finger to his lips, motioning for me to stay silent. He got close, far too close for comfort, backing me into the wall. His lips grazed my ear before he let out a spluttered sob. "There's something wrong with me," Kai whispered. "I keep blacking out, and what I do doesn't make sense. I keep trying to apologize to you, and I don't understand what's gotten into us. But He stepped back, dragging his nails down his face, stabbing them into his temple. "I can feel it," he said, his voice fracturing as he pressed harder against his temple, his lips curling into a maniacal grin. "There's something in my head, and it's right fucking there. I can't get it out of my head." Kai slammed his head into the mirror, but his expression stayed stoic. He didn't even blink. "I can't think," he whispered, tearing at his hair. "I can't fucking think straight, and I can't..." I watched his eyes seem to dilate, the edges of his lips crying out for help, slowly curl into a smirk, his arms falling by his sides. When he shoved me against the wall, the breath was ripped from my lungs. He kissed me, but it was forceful, and it hurt, the weight of his body pinning me in place. Kai's eyes were wide, his gaze locked onto my body, drool spilling from his lips and trailing down his chin. I shoved him back with a shriek, and he stumbled, blinking rapidly. I don't know why I did. That... The boy broke down, trying to stifle his own hysterical sobs. With an animalistic snarl, he punched the mirror, and it shattered on impact. His breaths were heavy, spluttering on sobs. "You need to get it out." Kai grabbed a shard of glass, stabbing it into his temple. "Please." His expression crumpled. "Get it out. If I can get it right here." He stabbed the shard into his ear, blood pooling out. "I'm so close, Amelia," he sobbed, clawing at his face. "So close, so close, so close." When he stabbed the shard into his cheek and burst into hysterical giggles, I remembered how to run. I could still hear him, his cries echoing down the hallway. "Get it out! Get it out! Get it out!" That night, after no communication from the outside world, I made sure to lock the 5 of us girls in Abigail's room. I was terrified of Kai, and as the night went on, the boys began to thunder upstairs, Wolf whistling and laughing, pounding at our door. I wasn't sure when and how I'd managed to fall asleep, only to be woken around 4 a.m. by a screeching sound and Elizabeth's voice calmly telling us to keep our eyes shut and leave the premises. and no matter what happened, we could not open our eyes. But I didn't have to see. I could already feel it, something sticky pooling between my bare toes as we left our room. Elizabeth's voice led the five of us downstairs, and I'll never forget the sensation of slipping in something wet and squishy that oozed and slicked the back of my bare soles. 24 hours later, we were informed that all 5 boys were dead, presumably killed by an animal that had gotten in. But that wasn't true. For 2 weeks, I stayed in the facility for more tests. Elizabeth and Nathaniel told us to be as honest as possible, but when the other girls started to speak up about that night, they were promptly removed from group therapy. Esme was the first. The girl who I looked up to broke into a hysterical fit, attacking 3 guards. The next time I saw her, she wore a dead-eyed smile. I did try to ask her about that night, only for her expression to go blank, her smile stretching wider and wider, almost inhuman. I didn't even realize she'd lunged at me, until Esme was straddling me, her hands around my throat. Something wet hit my cheek. Drool. Esme was drooling. I stayed quiet and pretended to take medication I was prescribed for trauma, spitting them down the drain. I didn't tell the people in white prodding me that I lost myself, lost time, and for a dizzying moment, lost complete control. The people in white tell me I awoke at the sound of the alarm, but that wasn't true. I just remember rage that was agonizing, tearing through me like poison. I remember awakening to animal-like screeching. I was curled up inside a sterile white room, my knees to my chest, sitting on a plastic chair. I felt perfectly clean, and yet Kai's blood was dried under my fingernails, slick on my cheeks, and dripping from my lashes. He was all over me, staining me, painting my clothes to my flesh. His entrails were bunched in my fists, entwined between my scarlet fingers. Rage. What he had done to me played like a stuck record in my head. I was half aware of my fingers scratching at the plastic of the chair. I could hear the other girls screeching, ripping the boys apart, and the stink of flesh, the sweet aroma of blood thick in the air, made my mouth water. I was on the edge of my seat, spitting out fleshy pieces of Kai's brain stuck between my teeth. I think I'm going crazy. His voice startled me, and I lifted my head, finding myself staring into 3 monitors playing footage from inside the mansion. There he was on the screen, balancing on a chair in front of a camera. His voice was slurred, his eyes dilated. I think there's... Kai punched himself in the face until his nose exploded, until he was picking at tiny metal splinters stuck to his lips and chin. There's something in my head, he wailed. The footage switched, this time to the testing center. There I stood, paralyzed, blinking rapidly at the ghostly figure I couldn't see. And standing in front of me was a boy. Tessa. His smile was wide, dreamlike. He could see me. It is you. I felt something come apart in my head, unraveling. Especially when I was painted head to toe in him. But the thought was burned away before it could fully form. The footage flickered to a smiling Elizabeth, with her arms folded. "It's okay, Amelia," she said. "We all knew the girls were going to come out on top. From the moment we are born, women are made to be the hunters, while men, who of course mentally devolve with animal-like traits, are the hunted." She laughed, only for Nathaniel to grumble something behind her. Proving this to my stubborn brother was of course a chore, but now he knows. Elizabeth's eyes were manic. The future is female. Women will climb towards the top of the food chain, while men, our pathetic little boys, will regress to mindless beasts. I took in every word, squeezing entrails between my fists. "All right, Amelia. I want you to repeat what I say, all right? Then you can go finish your meal. I bet you're excited." She leaned forward. "I'm sure you're looking forward to stage 2 of the experiment." Now what happens when the hunted fight back? The woman clapped her hands together. Even better. Why don't we see what happens when the hunters are let out of their cage? Just get on with it, Nathaniel said from behind her. Stop fucking gloating, sis. I found myself mimicking Elizabeth's smile, my lips spreading wider. It was a bear that killed the boys, she said in a sing-song voice. I copied her, the words rolling off my tongue perfectly. It was a bear. When the sliding glass door opened, releasing me back into the house, Freddy stumbled past me. Like clockwork, the girls surrounded him in a pack. Abigail was the first to lunge, leaping onto his back with a feral snarl. Esme followed, and then Jane. I don't remember much past that moment, but I do remember Freddy's blood sticking to my skin, ingrained and entangled inside me. Elizabeth's voice in my head said it was good. Pieces keep coming back to me, drenched in red. I see each of the boys that were torn apart. I see their terrified faces. And I ask myself why my brain won't let me mourn them. Instead, when I think of what was left of Ben's head caught between Esme's teeth, I only think of an unfiltered, writhing pleasure that creeps up my spine and twists in my gut, bleeding inside my brain. Why did my brain like it? The day I was released from the testing facility, I forgot my bag. Mom told me to go back and get it, and I did, though not before peeking into the room on my left, where I had been staying. Unlike my room, which had a bed and wardrobe, this one held a glass cage. Inside, a boy curled up like a cat, dressed in clinical white shorts and t-shirt. Something was stuck under his arm, just below his shirt sleeve. It looked like a needle, no doubt pumping him full of something. I took a single step over the threshold. A mistake. The instant I moved, he sensed me, diving to his feet and slamming himself headfirst into the glass. It took me a moment to fully drink this boy in. His eyes were inhuman, milky white filling his iris. There was no sparkle of awareness, all human features replaced with something feral, like I was looking at a rabid dog. When I found myself moving closer, something pulling me towards him, his lips curled back in a vicious snarl, sharp, elongated fangs ready to rip me apart. Strangely, I wasn't scared. Instead, my body took over. In 3 strides, I stood with my face pressed against the glass. Something was familiar about him, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Like a version of me that was suppressed and pushed down did remember him. The boy jumped back with a hiss, then leaned forward hesitantly to sniff the pain. Something inside me snapped, and I hissed back at him. His stink overwhelmed me, suddenly, thick and raw. Threat. The feeling was foreign, and yet I couldn't say I hadn't felt it before. Before I could stop myself, my body was lunging into the glass, an animalistic screech tearing from my lips. I couldn't control it. Suddenly, hunger and thirst overwhelmed me. My gaze locked onto his throat, where I sensed a healthy pulse. The boy cocked his head slowly, studying me. He opened his mouth to speak, but his words were tangled and wrong, blended together. That snapped me out of it. He snapped his teeth one more time, as if warning me, before stepping back and resuming his position curled into a ball. When logic returned in violent splutters, whatever had taken over me faded. Hey! I tapped on the glass, and his head jerked, like an animal's ears twitching. He only offered me an annoyed snort, burying his head in his arms. I took notice of a name scrawled on the cage in permanent marker. Bear. I couldn't get him out of my mind. Kai said there was something inside his head. His erratic behavior which led to him becoming more animal-like. Was the caged boy the final stage? I wish I could tell you things got better when I got home. But on my first night back, I ate an entire pack of raw bacon. Then I attacked my father, nearly clawing his eyes out. I almost killed my brother. So now, I've locked myself in my room, for their safety and my own. 3 days ago, I was formally invited to participate in Stage 2. It will take place from October to December. The bastards covered the first stage up. According to my town, the boys don't even exist anymore. I suspect their families have been paid off, or something more nefarious. Whoever, or whatever, was in that cage at the testing facility is Stage 2. Mom said no. Fucking obviously. Unlike Dad, she believes something is wrong with me. After examining me herself, she refuses to involve outsiders. Mom found a tiny incision behind my ear. She told me to leave it alone and promised to get me real help before whatever it is activated. But she's as scared as I am. She won't go to work. She just sits in front of my bedroom door, waiting. I've tried to copy Kai. Whatever they put inside his head, they put inside mine too. But no matter how many times I force the blade of Dad's penknife into the back of my ear, I can't find anything. Still, I know something is there. It's why I can smell Mom's scent so clearly. And no matter how hard I try to push the thought away, all I can think about is tearing out her throat. I know the other girls are waiting. I can already sense them crowding around the house, waiting for their kill. Mom is right behind the door with a baseball bat. We've been talking. I told her to kill me the second I stopped responding to her voice. She's not going to let anything or anyone hurt me, but I'm terrified she's going to have to use her weapon on me, or one of my girls, because I don't think I'm her daughter anymore. I don't think I'm fucking human anymore.